What's up? How's it going? In this video, I'm going to share with you a build for a crit fishing character in Baldur's Gate 3 that should be viable in the mid to late game. So it's pretty much common knowledge in like both the tabletop D&D community and the Baldur's Gate 3 community that crit fishing is generally not a good strategy. It's not that optimal. So the latest time that I played the game, I wanted to try to figure out how to make a crit fishing build that wasn't terrible. And that's the goal of this build. So I'm going to share my attempt to make a build that's not terrible. So to make a crit fishing build actually good, there's two things you need to do. You need to make critical hits reliable. So like you have to be able to crit pretty often, and you have to make them worthwhile. So a crit needs to do something good enough to be worth the effort or the opportunity cost that it took you to build around making critical hits happen instead of taking all the other good stuff that you could have been taking. By default, like the way the game works, neither one of those criterion is met if you don't go out of your way to do it. Right? So crits don't happen very often, and what they do is pretty overwhelming, which is why normally it's not really worth building a character around trying to get crits. So in this build, what we're going to do is we're going to try to make crits reliable by doing everything we can to lower the critical threshold, and by rolling a lot of dice, right? Making a lot of attack rolls that have a lot of dice in them. And we're going to make crits worthwhile by stacking up as many things as possible that are going to get re-rolled on crits. The other big goal of this build is to make it sustainable over a lot of combat encounters without running out of steam. The reason for that is when I play this game, I don't long rest very often. So it's really important for the build to still be strong without me having to like blow spell slots on every encounter. And the reason that's important is because like some people have rightly pointed out that one of the reasons crit fishing builds on a single character aren't good is because there are better ways to crit fish through teamwork. So for example, like instead of making a character who crit fishes on their own, you could just, you play with a team of people or a team of characters, you have one of them cast hold person or sleep or something, and then another character is automatically critting, and that's a much better way to crit fish. That's all true. And I'll include a link in the description to a video from Pack Tactics making that exact point. That point is true. But the problem with it is those strategies cost spell slots, right? So you can't spam them all the time. You can do that for a couple encounters and then you're out of spell slots and you can't use that strategy anymore. So this build that I'm going to share, on the other hand, it actually is one that you can go all day without burning that many spell slots. Maybe it should be called crit spamming instead of crit fishing, because that's the goal of the build, right? To be able to crit all the time and get something good out of it without having to use up spell slots that much. And in fact, when I played it recently, like I went through Act 2 with, I believe, only 2 long rests. And one of those long rests, I wasn't out of resources or out of hit points at the time. I only long rested because I was trying to get Elminster to show up because I hadn't been feeding Will or feeding Gale items. And this build was still working well, even without having taken long rests very much. All right, so those are the goals. Now let me show you the build. All right, so here we are towards the end of Act 2. I'm showing you this around the end of Act 2 because this is around where the build starts to get really good. Really, the build starts being good around the middle or around level 8 or 9, which is going to happen around the middle of Act 2 if you're doing like all the side quests. The reason the build gets good around there is because both you need to be around that level to get the features you need, and that's where you get the items that are really going to make this build good. So the idea of it is we're going to be using Rogue to have sneak attacks, which are going to give us a regular source of something good we can get out of crits, and it's an unlimited source, right? It doesn't run out, but it can only be used once per round. And then we're going to have Paladin, which is going to give us smites that we can't use all the time, but we can use it when we can't use sneak attacks, or when we have an enemy that really needs to go down right away. And on top of that, we're going to take Fighter to improve our crit chance. So the bare minimum that we need to make this work is 3 levels of Fighter so that we can take Champion, which is going to lower our crit threshold and make us more likely to get crits. We're going to need a level of Rogue to get sneak attacks, and we'll see in a minute why even only 1 level with a little mini sneak attack is still going to give us some good benefits. And we're going to need at least 2 levels of Paladin to be able to smite. After that, we need to get extra attack somehow, because the way to increase your chance of having a crit is to attack more. We can get extra attack 2 ways. The faster way is to go up to Fighter level 5, right? Because we already have 3 levels of Fighter. But in my case, I did it the slower way, which was going to Paladin level 5. This way I've got more spell slots so I can smite more. So this is where you'll be around by the second half of Act 2. Later we're going to talk about possible routes for developing beyond that. So that's the class progression that we're going to need for this build. Now let's look at what items and what other features make this actually not suck. So long story short, we're going to rely on a bunch of items to lower our crit threshold, and we're going to rely on this Sword of Life Stealing, which is going to give us some good benefits, and when we crit, it's going to make our crits really good. So let's first look at the things that make crits more reliable, and then we'll look at the things that make crits good. So these are the items that we're going to want to make our crits more reliable. This short sword, which you buy in the Githyanki Kresh, this lowers our crit threshold by 1. It also lets us reroll, so that's going to make our do more damage. But what we're really here for is this Organ Rearranger, right? It lowers our crit threshold, lets us crit more. Then we've got this. Earlier, you can get the Covert Cowl, which is in the basement of the house across from Last Light Inn. I later replaced it with the Dark Justiciar helmet, which does the same thing but does some extra stuff. Both this and Covert Cowl give us this Covert Critical. If we're in lightly obscured or heavily obscured, dark, whatever, it also lowers our crit threshold. Right? So this won't help all the time, but there are a lot of situations where you can be lightly obscured, especially in Act 2. So between Fighter, Champion Fighter, Knife of the Undermountain King, and this, our crit threshold is down to 18 when we're not obscured, 17 when we are obscured. And beyond this, we're going to want a lot of Elixirs of Viciousness. You can find these around sometimes, you can buy them sometimes from shopkeepers, but you can also craft them via alchemy by using Shadow Root Sacks. And there are a ton of Shadow Root Sacks scattered around Act 2, so just every time you see one of these big blue blobs, one of these Shadow Root Sacks, pick it up, make as many of these as you can. These lower your threshold by 1 more. You drink it once, it lasts until a long rest, so even though, right now I only have 8, I think I had 10 at some point, but I've used a couple. But I mean, really, if you're not long resting often, this is enough to get you through the whole game. So with all of those, our crit threshold is going to be 16 or 17, depending on whether or not we're obscured. Right, so when we're obscured, we have a 25% chance of critting on any given attack. The last thing that's really going to help a lot is this Risky Ring, which lets us have advantage all the time. Right? With advantage, we're attacking twice as often, or not attacking twice, we're rolling twice as many dice, so we have a higher chance of rolling crit. Um, here is a graph of how often we can expect to be critting based on those things. So here's the graph, shows a couple different things. Let's walk through it. The most important thing is what I'm showing on this graph is not the chance to crit on any given attack. It's the chance to crit in a whole turn of attacks. Because I think for a crit fishing build, that's really what matters. People often talk about, oh, champion fighter only raises you up to a 20%, 10% chance to crit or something. But we have to take into account the fact that we're attacking a bunch of times in one turn. So this character is generally attacking 3 times in one turn, twice with the attack action and once with the offhand attack. But for reasons that we will talk about soon, we really want to be critting with the main weapon, which is this Sword of Life Stealing. Critting with the offhand attack is not bad, but it's not as good as critting with the Sword of Life Stealing. So I've got separate bars here showing what's the chance that we crit at least once with the Sword of Life Stealing versus what's the chance that we crit at least once in any of our 3 attacks. I've broken the graph down by our chance of critting when we have advantage, which is on the right, versus when we don't have advantage, which is on the left. But keep in mind, once we get the risky ring, we're always going to have advantage, so the left half of the graph kind of becomes moot. And then I also have separate bars showing what's our chance of critting when we're not obscured versus when we are obscured. Because when we're obscured, the crit threshold goes down by 1 more because of that Dark Justiciar helmet or Covert Cowl. And so what you can see here is once we have the risky ring, like even in the worst circumstance, when we're not obscured, we've still got a 60% chance of critting at least once with our good weapon. Or like a 70-75% chance of critting at least once overall, right, with either the good weapon or the less good weapon. When we're obscured, that goes up even higher. We're having over 80% of our turns are getting crits in them. Okay, so with that out of the way, that's all the stuff that's going to make our crits happen more often. But remember, the other key part of having a decent crit fishing build is to make your crits do something that's actually worthwhile. And here are the things that are going to give us that. So probably the most important thing is this Sword of Life Stealing, which you buy from Damon at Last Life Inn. So this does an extra 10 damage when you crit. Downside is it doesn't work on constructs or undead, and you fight a lot of undead in Act 2, so this isn't going to help with them. But when it works, it's really good. The thing that makes this really good is this actually doesn't do an extra 10. It doesn't only do an extra 10. If you sneak attack or you smite, it does an extra 20. Because the game treats sneak attacks or smites as a separate instance of damage, at least if you have it set up to ask you to whether or not you want to sneak attack. The way you do that is you go into the reactions menu. On my keyboard is K. I think you can also do it from clicking some of these things, but I just click K, go in reactions, and you set it up so it will ask whether or not you want to sneak attack, whether you want to use sneak attack on your critical hit. So what that means is when you hit something you crit, it's going to do the 10 damage from this Sword of Life Stealing, and then when you say yes, I would like to sneak attack, it does the 10 damage again. So you're automatically getting an extra 20 damage on every crit, which is really good. And that's why I said that even just 1 level of Rogue is still really good, right? Because 1 level of Rogue, you're getting a 1d6 sneak attack. On a crit, that becomes a 2d6 sneak attack. But really, you're getting 2d6 plus 20 with this sword. So Sword of Life Stealing, that really makes this build good. Other than that, what you want is anything that's adding more damage dice, right? Because damage dice are being re-rolled whenever you crit. So what I have giving me that is the Helldusk gloves. You could also use Dark Justiciar gauntlets or anything else. What we're really here for is this extra 1d4 fire damage with weapon attacks. So on a crit, that becomes 2d4. Another thing that is really good for this build is the buff from the Drake Throat Glaive. So you put this on someone, and it gives you this draconic elemental weapon. So here's how it works. Let me put it on right now. My character is going to drop this sword. Lae'zel is gonna, let's give it cold damage, why not? Put some cold damage onto it. Let's switch her back to the weapon she was wearing.
Let's get going.
My character, where's that sword? Okay, put that back on. So now this sword does an extra 1d4 cold thanks to that Drake Throat Glaive. And of course that's going to become 2d4 on a crit. In the footage I was playing earlier in the video, I actually had forgotten to turn this on. So like actually this build is more powerful than what you see in the footage, because you know it's doing an extra 2d4 that you weren't seeing. Other things that can add damage dice that you will roll more on crit. One thing that's useful is Psionic Overload. This normally takes an action. You know, the way you get it is through the Illithid powers. Where is it? Psionic Overload. I don't remember where it is. It's somewhere. Here it is. So normally this takes an action, but in the Githyanki Crash you can pass some skill checks to make all your Illithid powers a bonus action. So this is giving you an extra 1d4 on each attack, and that becomes 2d4 whenever you crit. The downside is you have to use a bonus action to do it. That's a bonus action I would like to be using to attack with my offhand weapon. But I sometimes use this when I know I have a long fight coming, or like I can't reach anyone and I don't have anything to do with that bonus action. Another useful thing you can consider, sometimes I put on the Strange Conduit Ring and then cast some kind of spell beforehand, so that's going to give me another 1d4, which becomes 2d4 on a crit. A combo I've played with sometimes is, you know, use the Strange Conduit Ring and then cast Divine Favor on myself. It only lasts for 3 turns, but if you do a lot of attacks in those turns, it can be good, right? So when you crit, I'm doing my 2d6 from this sword, plus another 2d6 from sneak attack, plus 20 from that necrotic being doubled twice, plus 2d4 from this, another 2d4 cold there, 2d4 from my Strange Conduit Ring, and 2d4 from Divine Favor. Right? It adds up to quite a lot. Another thing that is very useful is this Call the Weak power. The reason this is useful is because it's super annoying when you almost kill someone but they're left with like 2 or 3 hit points, and then you really don't want to attack them again because you don't want to waste a big crit on someone with 3 hit points. You want to attack someone else. This Call the Weak just makes sure that doesn't happen, right? If someone gets down that low, they just get insta-killed. Another thing that I took that helps a lot is the Savage Attacker feat. So when I hit like Paladin level 4, I took Savage Attacker, so I roll my damage dice twice, so they roll higher. My Ancestry, I happen to use Tiefling in this build. The reason I chose that was because I get these free smites, which I can use when I'm out of spell slots. I can still smite that way. In practice, I almost never do it because they use up my bonus action, and I would rather just attack with my offhand weapon and have a chance at another crit. But I sometimes use it. Another good way you could go is half work, so you further increase your crit damage. Although the increase, it's going to be another 1d6. It's not a whole lot added up on top of all the other things we're getting. So those are the things that make the build pretty good. What could we do going beyond Act 2, right? So right now we're at level 9. We've got 3 more levels to play with. There's a few options. I haven't tried them yet because I haven't gotten that far yet, but the one I'm probably going to go with is going into Warlock level 3. That's going to give me level 2 smites, which come back on a short rest. Right? So by the time I hit that level, I'll be getting 6 more smites within a long rest. Plus, if I take Great Old One, I get Mortal Reminder, right? That has a chance to make people afraid whenever they're critted, and I'll be critting a lot. So that should be good. Another option would be to go Wizard. Wizard would give me more spell slots. It would give me Arcane Recovery. Right? So if I took 3 levels of Wizard, that would ultimately add up to 1 more second level spell slot over and above what I have here, and 2 more third level slots. Plus, I'd get Arcane Recovery, which could restore 2 more first level spell slots. So I'd be getting 5 more smites within a long rest. Not quite as much as what I get out of Warlock. Another option would be to go up to Rogue 3 to make my sneak attack better. And I could, if I take Thief Rogue, then I'm getting another bonus action. And then I could go up to Fighter 4 to get a feat. That might not be that great. I haven't done the math yet. I don't really care about the extra bonus action because it would increase my chance of critting because I'd be making 4 attacks in a round instead of 3. But my chance of critting is already pretty high. And in fact, if I crit too much, I'm going to be that won't be sustainable if I don't have enough spell slots to smite that much. And also going to fighter level 4 and getting another feat, I don't know if it's worth it. There are several feats that would be nice, but there aren't really any feats left that would be amazing for this build. And I don't really need an ability score increase because I don't really care about my hit chance, because with this build, I'm not really hitting enemies by beating their AC, I'm just hitting them by critting them, so it doesn't matter what my dex modifier is. I don't really care about my +3 to damage from dexterity, because most of my damage isn't coming from the modifier, it's coming from the dice that I'm rerolling. Last option could be to go up to Paladin level 8, that's going to give me 1 more spell slot, and it's going to give me a feat. But I don't think it's going to be that good. It's only 1 more spell slot, so only 1 more smite. Again, the feat's probably not worth it. The Paladin level 6 and 7 abilities don't really help this build. Right? So those are options for progressing further. Like I said, I'm probably going to try it with Warlock 3. There are some alternative ways that you could do this build. So one thing we could do is, ditch these 3 fighter levels. And take something else. Because really the only reason we've got these fighter levels are for the champion fighter ability that lowers our crit threshold. But our crit threshold's already quite low. So maybe it would be more valuable to pour these levels into, for example, Thief, so that our critical hits or sneak attacks will be better. I don't know. I haven't done the math, but that's an option. Another option could be to ditch this whole melee thing, ditch these swords, and instead of using Sword of Life Stealing, I just do the typical rogue thief with 2 hand crossbows. So I'd have an even better chance to crit. I haven't done the math. I think I would still be getting the benefit from Knife of the Undermountain King, even if I'm not using it, if I just have it equipped. And I'd be making 1 more attack, right? Because I'd have 2 attacks with my main action and 2 with 2 bonus actions. So I'd have a better chance to crit. And that build, the Rogue Thief making 4 attacks with Sharpshooter, that's already a very powerful build anyway. And I'd be getting more sneak attack damage on my crits. For example, I could be like Fighter 3, Rogue 7. My sneak attacks would be 4d6. But the downside is I'd only get that sneak attack once per turn. So those turns when I have multiple critical hits in a turn, I wouldn't be able to pour them into smites or anything. So that's the build. You've seen some footage at the beginning of me critting things. I'll put some more footage at the end here. So now let's talk about the limitations of this build. The biggest one probably is that it doesn't really come online until a ways into Act 2. Because it relies mostly on items that we get in Act 2, like the Sword of Life Stealing, and you need to be at around level 8 or 9 to be able to have the extra attack plus the sneak attack and the smites and the improved critical threshold. So it takes a while for this build to come online. This character is actually pretty weak through Act 1. Basically, through Act 1 and even maybe a little bit of the beginning of Act 2, this character wasn't doing much and was kind of being carried by the rest of the party. And it's kind of a shame because by the time you reach Act 2, you don't really need this much power anymore. Because by the time you're that far in Act 2, all your builds are coming online, everyone's getting powerful. It really, Act 1 is the hardest part of the game, because that's the part when no one's build is that powerful yet. So that's probably the main weakness of this build, right? Is that it doesn't get powerful until too late to be useful. And up until then, this character can't do all that much. Another limitation is that while I think it's pretty good, it might not be as good as the various alternatives that are already known to be really powerful, and that come on faster. So things like Tavern Brawler Monk, Tavern Brawler Thrower, Great Weapon Master Barbarian, right? Everyone knows these builds are really good, and you don't have to wait until the middle of Act 2 to be able to do them. And even things that do take a little bit of similar long time to come online, like the Sharpshooter Thief Rogue who's making 4 shots with Sharpshooter, you can start that as early as level 4, but you can't really hit reliably until the middle of Act 2. Or things like Pact of the Blade Fighter multiclass with Arcane Synergy, right? Those are also really powerful. They might be more powerful than this. I haven't really done a careful comparison, but that is a limitation of this build, right? Because if you're being the crit fishing rogue paladin, then you're not being a Tavern Brawler Monk or something else you could be that's really powerful. Generally, in my experience, when I've played through the game before, my powerful damage dealing builds, they typically do around 100 damage per round to a single target, if they're not expending resources, right? So of course that goes up if I'm expending resources. If I'm doing an action surge, casting haste, using Elixir of Bloodlust or something, that damage amount can be a lot higher. But the baseline I'm kind of used to is about 100 damage per round if I'm not using anything up. This crit fishing or crit spamming build, from what I can tell, it seems to have a wider variance around that. So sometimes it does a good deal more than that. Sometimes it does less. And it probably has a lower average than those. So another limitation of the build, not really a limitation, but just something that you may or may not find fun, is that originally when I started playing this, I had kind of imagined it as being a little bit of a teamwork build. So part of the reason I wanted to try it was because I thought it would be fun to have the rest of my party working together to give advantage to my crit fisher. Right, so I had an Eldritch Knight with the Vision of the Absolute trying to blind people. I had a Barbarian going into Wolfheart Rage, giving advantage to people nearby, giving advantage to attacks on people nearby. I had a monk stunning people, right? So that was kind of the concept I had in mind for the character. But at the early part of the game, where it was really useful to have that teamwork going on, the crit fishing, my crit fishing character still didn't do a lot of crits, and the damage on their crits was not that high. And then around the time where the build really came online, so middle of Act 2, I got the Sword of Life, stealing all this other stuff. That's also the time that I got the Risky ring, and then I didn't need teamwork anymore, right? Because my character just automatically has advantage all the time. So that's a potential limitation of the build, right? Is that you don't get to really feel this kind of fun teamwork aspect. Another small limitation of the build is that, as far as I can tell, you can't both smite and sneak attack at the same time on a crit. That's one of the things I had wanted. I thought it would be cool to really blow up someone by smiting and sneak attacking them at the same time. but it doesn't seem to work. So as you can see in the footage, um, when you make the game ask you whether or not to smite, whether or not to sneak attack, whatever, as long as you're making the game ask you whether to smite, the game also asks whether you want to sneak attack. So it pulls up this menu that says, do you want a Divine Smite level 1 slot? Do you want a Divine Smite level 2 slot? Do you want to paralyze and critical? Do you want to sneak attack? You can only choose one of those things, right? So once you choose one, the game automatically does it. So much for being able to smite and sneak attack and paralyze all in one attack. Um, I suspect it might work if you turn off the asking, right? So if you just let the game automatically do things on a crit. But then the problem is you're gonna blow through all of your smites in like your first combat. So I really think it's important in this build to make the game ask so you can save the smites for when you really want it. But the limitation of that is that just because of the way the game is programmed, it doesn't let you, smite sneak attack at the same time. So that is the crit fishing build. Feel free to give it a try and let me know how it goes for you. Thanks for watching.